Wait a second. This isn't your grandma's cancer show.
Not your grandma's cancer show.
Hi, I'm Tatum, and today we're talking about mental health. And it's something that can affect us before, during, and sometimes way after our cancer treatment. Sometimes it just doesn't get talked about enough. So I have Clare from Shine Cancer Support with me today, and we're going to be responding to some stories that were shared at Shine Connect, which is our young adult cancer conference. It's the only one in the UK. And I want to mention just right off the bat that we are going to be talking about suicidal thoughts. So if that's something that's not right for you today, please take care of yourself and, feel free to skip to another episode. And if you are staying with us, you'll be hearing from Rime, who was diagnosed with mental health conditions before she was diagnosed with cancer. She has bipolar and EUPD. And we're going to hear a bit about how that all played into her experience of treatment. And we're going to hear from Ciaran, who is actually in the middle of treatment when he knew he needed help. And Ben, who was a long time after treatment, where he realised that his coping mechanisms were actually quite detrimental. So not talking and drinking. So many of us, I'm sure, can relate to some of those. So I have Clare with me today. Welcome, Clare.
Hiya, lovely to be here.
I should say welcome back, because you've been on this show several times now.
Don't get rid of me.
No, nor do we want to. So I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and a bit about what you do at Shine.
I'm Clare. It's lovely to be here. I currently now work for Shine as what we call the Program Delivery Manager. What that basically means is I'm in charge of working out all the logistics behind making our online programs work. We'll talk, I'm sure, a little bit about those in a moment. But what that means on a very practical level is talking to lots and lots of people who are living with and beyond cancer about their experiences and getting them together in groups to share those. So it really does give me kind of an up-close view of the reality of living with cancer and the struggles that people go with. And obviously, alongside that is the mental health challenges that come with it. I became part of Shine because I have my own experience. I was diagnosed with a Ewing's osteosarcoma when I was 17. So I've also been through cancer treatment and have a very personal version of what it's like to struggle with mental health going through that as well. So that's my experience when it comes to this stuff.
Do you find that some people are a bit surprised when they run into kind of a mental health wall or a challenge that they really weren't expecting to?
Yeah, I think often they are. I think for a lot of people, when I talk to people, they'll be like, but, I was coping fine before. I've been through challenges before and I've been fine and I had my coping strategies. And sometimes I think it does take people by surprise, the kind of, I like to call it that rug pull moment, the moment that it completely changes everything and takes your feet out from under you, or it can do. And I think that can be quite shocking. I think the way in which it presents can also surprise people. They'll think, well, it would be normal if I was worried about my symptoms or my treatment, but actually it's coming out as social anxiety and I don't want to see anyone. And that's kind of like, it can be quite surprising in the way it presents, I think. And I think this is all because really we just don't talk about it enough. Like when you get diagnosed, there's not someone sitting down going, now listen, lots of people struggle around this time and you might find you're feeling this and that. And maybe that's a part of it, the kind of lack of open chat around this stuff.
Yeah, and I think sometimes whatever coping mechanism you've used in the past sometimes doesn't work when you get to cancer. Yeah. So it can feel like this whole new, like even though you've had, as you said, loads of challenges in the past, or, I'm tough enough, or you're even thinking of it as just a physical thing and, I'm still carrying on with my life, like it can still catch up with you. And in a way that is, I love the description you gave, that rug pull moment. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, from a very personal perspective, when I was diagnosed, I was an absolute, I was a real perfectionist. I was at school, I would work very hard, did everything on time, did everything right. But, I was a perfectionist. And that was how I did things. And obviously there isn't a way to do cancer treatment in a perfect, neat and tidy box. And so I was like, oh, I have nothing. I have nothing. I have no ways of coping with this that feel comfortable to me anymore. Like, I'm not one to talk about how I feel very openly. That didn't, that felt alien. So I think it is the way you live your life might work perfectly well until you come up against a particularly new challenge. And yeah, it can be really tough.
I think it's really fascinating how they are coming up with more and more kind of descriptions of the fight and flight response. So it used to be just fight and flight because they were mainly studying men, but they have now branched it out. So we've got fight, flight, freeze, fawn, sometimes known as submit. But yes, so you have those people that might get quite angry, and kind of want to fight and, start arguments and, really get in the weeds in that way. And then you have other people that just want to flee the scene, close it up. I'm out, like I'm not dealing with it. And then you have those that, and I think the submit is so challenging because you almost become so disconnected from yourself that you're not checking in with how you are, and you're just like accepting, but not in a empowered way. But things are being done to you. And the fawning is also fascinating, sometimes known as flattering, where you're just want to say nice things just to get out of the room, to get out of the situation. And, how all of those play into your mental health is fascinating, because when we have a challenge, what do we do? Do we fight? Do we run? Do we, disconnect? Do we start finding people to flatter and make nice with them? So I think we should have a listen to Rime's story. And Rime was diagnosed with breast cancer, and we're going to come in where she is explaining a little bit about her prior diagnosis.
So EUPD basically stands for emotional unstable personality disorder. And it's kind of misleading with saying personality disorder, because people just assume it means you have multiple personalities, and that's a different diagnosis completely. It's called something completely different. This is actually because I am unable to emotionally regulate myself as well as the average Joe, and I require medication to do so. And that helps also with the bipolar, because bipolar, in addition to EUPD, kind of exacerbates my manic and episodes as well as my down episodes. So I have to take medication for that. So this is even before I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I was learning to manage that, and that's really difficult. And what I learned through coming to Shine is I met other people that also had bipolar and also went through breast cancer, and how their journeys were also complicated as well as mine. And it was difficult for the health professionals as well, because they were dealing with someone that couldn't take the medication, because I couldn't take my mental health medication during my treatments, because they were going to interfere and it wasn't going to have any impact. So there was a likelihood, they knew there would be a likelihood of me having a psychotic episode or a depressive episode, and I had both. But yeah, EUPD is very much about not being able to regulate your emotions. But yeah,
the things that were keeping you emotionally regulated, things that were keeping your bipolar stable so that you could do your job and everything, those things that you needed, then didn't have access to in treatment.
No, not at all.
So at one of the most stressful times, your support basically goes away.
Exactly.
How did you feel when you knew that you weren't going to be able to have your medication?
I there's been so many periods where I thought I could do things anyway without medication, because that's the other thing about bipolar is when you're manic, you think everything is wonderful and you think that you don't need medication anymore because you're thinking irrationally. So that's what happened during my breast cancer. I started going into a manic episode. I was involved in various movements and I did lots of campaigning, pretending that I wasn't going through all of that. I was going through these delusions. So that's how it triggered. But yeah, it was inevitable in some ways. But when you're in it, you don't realize it's happening. And
did your oncology team have anything in place for you?
They really didn't. They didn't know how to deal with it, and they kept on saying to me, like, after everything and I calmed down and after I got sectioned and I was discharged after all my treatments, etc., then they realized I needed, therapy and I mean, during the treatments, actually, I'm completely wrong. I did have some therapy, but it was only 6 sessions, and for someone that has this kind of level, it didn't work. So I can't even, this is the reason why I can't even remember those sessions, because that didn't even touch anything whatsoever. But they did offer that, and that was through Macmillan. But in the end, I had to pay privately several years after my breast cancer journey. And that's why I say to people, if they can get a psychotherapist or a therapist from the beginning to help them process everything, I always will recommend that, because that's a mistake that I made. I did it very late. And I did process things, and I was manic and therefore got involved in lots of campaigns. And in some ways, some things come out are positives, and it's not all negatives when you're going through these manic episodes. You can actually achieve also things. That's what the strange thing about it. And that's why people don't know whether you are going through it or whether, you are just being generally happy.
But that must be
difficult.
A challenging place to assess what it is that you need, and also to advocate for yourself.
Definitely.
And relay to a medical team what it is that you need.
Definitely.
And so how did that kind of, tell me a little bit about your how the diagnosis, the process of being diagnosed was for you.
Yeah, so it was like nearly 5.5 years ago now, but I remember it so clearly. I remember coming out of the shower and I have a mirror. I don't tend to look at myself very often, which is quite bad of me. And I certainly didn't check my breasts regularly. That's really terrible of me, and especially as I come from a background of public health, where I was part of promoting screening for breast cancer and all these various messages, but wasn't taking on the advice. So I take some part in my errors, but the nipple basically inverted in, and I knew at that point that was definitely going to be cancer. And when I felt it, it was a big lump behind it. So I ignored this for quite a long time. And then when I saw my GP, he referred me. Within 2 weeks, I immediately got biopsies and scans and blood tests, etc. And it was confirmed to me that it was a grade 2 stage 3 breast cancer, because it was 8 centimeters long. So the thing is, I was saying this to you earlier, Tatum, in films, when they portray people going through cancer, you have this image of your family and friends coming together and supporting you exactly how you want and need, etc. And I had the complete opposite. It actually divided my family, because at the time, not only I was going through breast cancer, but my mother was going through breast cancer. And I never was particularly close with my family. I was always the black sheep, so I didn't feel I wanted them to be part of my breast cancer journey. So I tried to do it on my own with the help of friends. But obviously those are all added stresses, and all manifested, unfortunately, in a psychotic episode in the midst of my treatments. It's really difficult. I think health professionals are trying to figure out how to support people that have a mental health diagnosis at the same time as going through intrusive treatments like chemo, which will affect their medication. So that is still a question mark. I don't think they knew what to do. And I think it's something that I certainly want to push for, to try and make understand the health professionals about how it impacts people with a already diagnosis of mental illness. But yeah, there wasn't much for me, really. I had to do all the hard work myself to figure out how to pick myself up and rebuild a new me through psychotherapy.
Yeah. And so where were you in your treatment when you had the psychotic episode?
Yeah, so I was just about to start radiotherapy. So I completed mastectomy, a failed reconstruction, and then lymph node clearing. And then after that, I went into a psychotic episode, and I had to keep going. Like, I had a nurse that followed me to the hospital to have my radiotherapy, because it was a daily thing for a period of time. And so, yeah, it was the most awful experience of my life. That was the first time I've ever been sectioned and ended up in a mental health ward. And it was traumatic. Already, breast cancer is traumatic in itself, but adding that on top was just on another level that I've never experienced in my life. And then I went into actually a manic episode when I was discharged from there. So I guess when they gave me the antidepressant, that kind of made me go up and up and up. And then I came out, like, again, in a manic episode, and then crashed again into a period of depression. So it was really hard, the aftermath of, even after finishing radiotherapy, like picking myself up in so many bits of pieces was certainly not easy. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But like I always say,
going through the menopause at that point as well.
Exactly. But I always say to people, I think going through all of this, although I wish it on no one, I think it gives you that kind of depth and understanding about life and about the way you view life, about your perspective. It changes everything in your life. And that's not a bad thing, because initially I was scared of that. I wanted just the old me. I wanted just to get back into normal. And in fact, the doctors, when they first diagnosed me, said, "You've got the easy cancer. Your life will get back to normal within 2 seconds. Don't worry," And I thought maybe that's true, but that wasn't the case for me. And that's not the case for a lot of people that I've spoken to through Shine, and that's what I love about Shine, is the fact that I was able to connect with people exactly that have gone through what I've gone through and understood fully what I've gone through, because they also are bipolar, and going through breast cancer treatment. So Shine has helped lots in that way. And the breakout program also taught me what's within my control and what isn't. So yeah, it's work in progress. I'm not saying that I've rebuilt myself and I'm gonna save the world now suddenly, but I'm much more realistic now about what I can achieve for myself and within my limits and boundaries.
So yeah, to hear that, the doctor saying, "You have the easy cancer, you'll be back to normal just straight away," just really shows the absolute kind of, so many people thinking, "Oh yeah, I'm going to get back to my life." But actually, we come as complex humans, and so many people have this complicated journey. I'd love to hear, Claire, what you heard in Rime's experiences.
Yeah, I mean, exactly that, isn't it? It's that we come sort of preloaded with all these experiences and a history and a culture maybe that informs how we react to challenges in life, and to kind of to wrap it all up and say, well, you've done the treatment now, so you can just get on with it and get back to it. It's such an unrealistic thing. I think the thing that stands out for me from Rime's story is the approach of healthcare professionals, that physical and mental health care is so disjointed.
Yeah.
That the lack of kind of coordination of those two specialties, I just can't understand it, because we all know that going through any health, I mean, people who just have flu for 2 weeks come out feeling battered, emotionally vulnerable. You find yourself more tearful, everything feels much more overwhelming, and that's on a really small, minor level. And so anyone who's going through a serious life-threatening health event, whatever it might be, or people living long term with a chronic condition or an incurable, it's inevitable that people will have some kind of feelings about it. Like whether that tips over into sort of being a mental health diagnosis, I think it's kind of irrelevant. It's the fact that we just don't connect the two.
Yeah.
But even more so in Rime's situation, where she had an established set of treatment and a setup that kind of broadly worked, and you know that actually the transition between the two services just doesn't take that into account, and the one doesn't support the other, and they seem really, you know, I love my healthcare professionals, and yeah, you know, I'm a big champion for the healthcare in this country, but this particular area, I'm like, it feels really lacking.
Yeah, there's so much more that really should be done. And it also shows that it, you know, the fact that she mentioned she hadn't had a psychotic break like that before, she had never been sectioned before, just shows how much, like, whatever you were maybe dealing with in the past, how much elevation there is when you're also going through a failed mastectomy reconstruction, you know, or, you know, thinking about doing all of this but not having your family around, and this kind of unique, you know, but everybody's unique. So it you know, like what Rime was saying about having, like, you know, this film kind of version of everyone's rallying around, not everyone has that situation, and that's actually common. And so just the you have the easy cancer, you'll be back to normal, just is so almost gaslighting.
It is. And it's not just, I mean, we're sort of saying, you know, the challenge, the sort of existential challenge of being given a life-threatening diagnosis in itself, the kind of the psychological impact, but also the physical stuff, like all the chemicals they put in you. I mean, I remember having one particular drip that went through with my chemo where I would get instantaneous panic attacks. And I was like, it was no, you know, there was no kind of warning or talk about what was going on, and I thought I was losing my mind, you know, and it was, fortunately for me, relatively short-lived. You know, it'd be a few hours, which was unpleasant enough, but you know, there are so many different factors at play.
Yeah,
all the kind of social, psychological, physical, everything can feed into that escalated sense of like emotional vulnerability, I think.
And can I ask you, like, what did your panic attacks look like?
They were just, I mean, it was such an odd thing, because obviously at first I didn't associate it with the drip that had just been put up. I just suddenly felt like it was like the feeling that my life was in danger, you know, like someone might as well have been holding a gun to my head, that kind of fear with no reason. And it was just such an odd, I think the tricky thing is also when you have a cancer diagnosis, people go, don't worry, we know it's a really stressful time, you're obviously, and you kind of want to say, no, this isn't normal anxiety and worry about what's going on. This is a whole other level. And trying to communicate that, and that's something else actually I picked up from Rime talking, is the burden on her to advocate at a time when she was already under so much pressure because people didn't understand or wouldn't, you know, the services weren't there. I think the ability to describe what's happening to you in an assertive way and get the support you need when you feel like you might be losing a grip on your sanity, it's you're not really in a position to do it. So the kind of meeting that lack of understanding about what's happening to you, what you feel is happening to you, so difficult.
And the fact that they knew that, because they would know what bipolar is and what manic can look normal, you know, can look like someone's thriving, that isn't necessarily a space where someone can tap into actually what I need. Whereas someone else might be in a feeling of feeling worthless and be on the other end of it. And again, if you're feeling worthless, how are you asking for help? How are you advocating for yourself? So yes, the burden being on the person to do it. I think we could rearrange the healthcare system, Claire. I think we really could. We can make it so much better.
Cup of tea and a few biscuits. We'll sort the world out.
We will. We're going to hear from Ciaran, who had testicular cancer, and he actually was in the middle of treatment when he knew that he needed some help.
So I remember when, before I went to start chemo, that my doctor, oncologist, said, so you're 35, all your blood test results are phenomenal, like magnesium, iron, zinc, everything is like average or above average. You have no deficiencies. Your testosterone level is 30% above the UK male average. You are literally, she said, a prime candidate for chemotherapy. And 75% of people sell for it. And 15-20% have mild to moderate side effects. And then she said, what 2 to 5% have a bad run, but we don't think that's going to be you. So I held that close, obviously, and I prided myself on my physical, capabilities and prowess. So it was hard for me to talk to a nurse during halfway through chemo when I started to have thoughts about basically I'd started to have flashing images of slitting my wrists in the doctor's surgery, like a cry for pain. I don't know what it was. It just started to happen. And then I started to think about throwing myself in front of a train at a specific train station. And that's basically what was going through my mind. And it started to happen like 30, 40 times a day. And then it got to the point where I went into chemo one morning, and I know now what happened, because at the time I didn't realize, but I stopped speaking. And a nurse tried to engage with me a few times and said, Ciaran, you're not speaking now. This is a concern. So we need you to actually speak so we can hook you up to the chemo and move on with the day. And I finally said, I can't speak. And she said, why not? And I said, because I'm having crazy thoughts. And she said, I always remember, it said, what's the craziest thing you thought in the last 24 hours? I just said, I'm going to kill myself. And that's it. And she says, how are you going to do it? And I told her exactly that. So she said, okay, just stay there. So then she brought in a doctor. I haven't talked about this in a while. Then she brought in a doctor, and I always remember, because he lightened it without meaning to. He held my hand and he says, okay, Ciaran, I'm not a doctor of feelings, but I'd like and I didn't laugh because I was so depressed, but internally it was like a quip, like a comedic quip, and I did giggle internally. I looked him dead in the eye. I was like, what are you talking about, mate? I found it quite funny. Yeah. He's a lovely guy, and I just says, yeah, I don't want to do this no more. I don't want to do the treatment. I just want to die. It's just too much. I can't. It's 24/7 now. It's just not relenting, and it's constantly. What's constant? I want this throbbing in my face, like my eyes and my ears. It's just like it's just constant pain, and if some of probably a few, because there's 30 people on, someone knows what tinnitus is or tinnitus. I never know which one it is. But if you have a bad day, just multiply that on chemo by 1,000, and it's just like someone's put a screwdriver in your ear and it's just poking you continuously. It was horrible. So anyway, yeah, that's the kind of the grim side. And then he said, okay, so can you do chemo? And I just was blank again, and something came from within, and I said, yeah, just hook. Actually, that's it. I said, yeah, just hook me up. I said, just hook me up and let me be. And he went, okay. I said, just minimal talking to me. And then they said, he came back half an hour later after I was hooked up, and he said, we're going to send you down for emergency psychiatric evaluation at Thomas's. For some reason, they couldn't do it internally. The specialist was in Thomas's, so they got me a taxi, fair play to them, or an ambulance after chemo. They called my mum, and she was my next of kin. I'm not married. I don't have kids. And she had to have that call. And I went down to chemo, and I had this lovely woman, like, spoke to me for an hour. And you know what? I'm never going to say I was or I wasn't going to do it, because I had some really aggressive thoughts. And one time I did stand near a train station, but I'm never going to say I was or I wasn't. Hopefully I wasn't. But what happened that day with her was what the doctor's orders, pardon the pun, someone heard me out. I didn't have to put on the front of, I don't want to say aggressive, but like, listen, I'm a sporty, athletic, proud, aggressive man in a sporting context and stuff like that. I'm powerful. My physique was always important to me. I was always viewed not as an alpha, but I was always viewed as like a Jack the lad. physical prowess, just like a woman's, beauty is held up in her 20s. A man's physicality can be held up in his 20s. And it was really, really hard for me to say I'm struggling. That's what I'm trying to say. Because of where I came from, an Irish cultural background, we've changed a lot of society the last 50 years. For me to cry out and just cry, I cried with her for like half an hour. I hadn't cried in like that. It wasn't the done thing. And at the end of it, she says, because when I walked in, she says, how on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely you to harm yourself? And I went 8, 7, 8. And after the talk and the cry, it was a really, really good cry. And I've cried 60 times since then. So that was a starting point. She went, how like you now? And I was like, listen, like a 2. I don't feel good. And she said, you needed to talk, didn't you? And yeah, I needed to get some things off my chest.
Claire, what stands out to you hearing Ciaran talk about that?
Wow, it's such, I mean, he describes it in such a way you feel you're there with him, don't you? It's amazing. But for me, I think it's that the sort of physical relentlessness and what that can do to you, what it can do to you emotionally and psychologically. It's not just something you can sort of sleep off, those symptoms. And like he said, thankfully, it's not the vast percentage of people that get this kind of awful reaction to treatment that is kind of physically so challenging. But you just think, I mean, when he describes, it sounds like torture, doesn't it? It's what you do to torture someone. And then why are we surprised that people feel like, I cannot cope with this? I cannot do one more day, one more hour. This is feeling, I don't want to do this. I do not want to be feeling like I'm feeling anymore.
And that's, I think, hard for people that have never had maybe a health condition or, a life-threatening situation, that you see someone struggling for their life and are not necessarily understanding why, that struggle is so hard that you might not want to live anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it must seem objectively like a strange sort of contrast that you've got all these people trying to save your life, basically, all these kind of interventions, and everything is going towards that goal. It makes it very difficult to say, hold on a minute, that's, I'm not feeling that way at the minute, and I need to talk about it. And like you said, that kind of the relief. I mean, when he said she just heard me out, like that's what he just needed to be able to say that. And that's something that just feels, from talking to lots and lots of people going through the Shine programs, but generally in the community, it's just that space to be able to say the things that you think might feel unacceptable to other people, things that you think people aren't going to understand this. They won't get why, in amongst trying to save my life, I'm also thinking about ending it. Like that just you'd think that wouldn't make sense. And so to talk about it openly is even harder, isn't it?
Yeah, I really struggled myself with 2 different types of thoughts. So there was definitely a long time that I wish that I hadn't existed. That I remember driving past the place where, sort of not where my mum and dad met, because they met out on a boat in the middle of, but a place where they had been before I was born, and almost screaming mentally back in time, don't do it. I don't want to exist. If there was a button that I could have pressed to not exist, I would have done that. And there was this absolute sense of like life being like, what is the point? It isn't life anymore. It's existing. I know what I need to do in terms of looking after my sister and staying alive for her. But there was no point to life. And another time where I was hearing a voice which wasn't my own, which I've heard that's the voice to pay even more attention to. And I was on this drug, and it was a hormonal drug. I'd already had my ovaries out, but it was to suppress any last little traces of estrogen in my body. So it was like really like an estrogen curfew. And when I was taking that, I started to get thoughts that were just jump in the river. Just do it. And I was like, that's not my voice. And wait a minute, what about my sister? And it was like, no one's going to pay any attention. You're worthless. You're nothing. Just go. And, you know, from finding out since then that, you know, I think both of those, you need to look for help and someone to talk to about them. But when you're almost having plans, it's like a fire alarm to go get help.
I mean, I was going to ask when that was happening, what was your instinct about telling someone else about that thought or feeling?
I mean, I was ashamed.
Yeah.
I was really ashamed because I could live with I just have to exist. I could live with, you know, life isn't life anymore, like that kind of really dark place. But to feel crazy was a whole other level, and I felt crazy, and I felt the voice was really scary, I have to say. But because I knew it was related to this particular drug that I was supposed to be on for 10 years, I knew that was behind it. There was a little bit of control in there that if I don't take the drug, then I might not have that voice. Whereas I imagine someone else having that voice, but maybe not knowing which out of the multitude of drugs are going in. Or you were saying that particular drip and the panic attack. Like, if you don't have the association, how would you have any sense of control? So I think I was quite lucky in that.
I think there's something in there as well, isn't there, that the feeling crazy, because when you're going through sort of a huge health thing, like, I don't know about you, but I feel I have to be really on my game, and I have to be able to advocate, and I have to be believable and trustable, and I need the healthcare professionals to take me seriously. And that is such a part of feeling secure going through that process. It's feeling like not you're on an equal footing, but you know that you're being taken seriously. And there's a fear there, isn't there? As if you go and start telling them, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm hearing, this is what I'm feeling, are you just going to be written off as someone who can't really be their point of view isn't going to be, will it be down on my notes forever if I ever go back and start kind of, you know, if I'm trying to advocate or perhaps complain, am I just going to be written off as this person? All that, it's so complex, that kind of the relationships we have within our experiences of illness are so complex and tied together that it makes it, there are lots of reasons I can understand why you'd be reluctant to go and talk to people.
Yeah. And yet that connection and being heard and being told, this is, you know, the unusual in our case is usual. Like, again, we were all diagnosed so young, that's unusual. And side effects are rare, but they also happen. And I think there's something about, you know, in both of those, you know, Rime's story and Ciaran's is, you know, oh, these side effects happen, but we don't think it will happen to you. Yeah. You know, this, you know, you have the easy cancer. Like, come on.
You'll bounce back because you're young.
Yes. You're young, you know, you're strong, you're fine. But actually, you know, perhaps all that strength, you know, can actually be, you know, you have a further place to fall from. And I've had some tinnitus as well, not as bad as that, but oh my God, hats off to him for dealing. It's the most awful, like you were saying, torturous thing.
And I think, like, exactly what you said, you know, I think all those thoughts around, I can't talk to someone or I shouldn't, you know, I'm not saying those are reasons not to. What I'm saying is that is an understandable feeling when you're in the middle of it. And the reality is, when you do, in my experience and lots of experiences I've had, when you do mention it to someone, they're like, of course you're struggling. It would be really unusual if you weren't. Like 70% of young adults with cancer will say that they've suffered with depression. It's the norm. Like, it is not weird. You're not going crazy. You're not, you know, none of those things are true. But you might, if you're saying those to yourself as a reason not to ask for help,
Mm-hmm.
And have a little go at challenging those, because you're definitely not on your own in that.
The doctor's response of "I'm not a doctor of feelings" was like the most honest, I imagine, like the most authentic response, which, yes, like, as you know, he said he found funny somewhere in him, you know, and the fact that that doctor did refer him on to someone who was, someone that could take on board. So there is that thing of the person that you speak to the first time might not be the exact right person to talk to you, but there will be someone.
There will be.
Yeah.
There absolutely will be. And it's, I think, talking about the difference between, when, like, that what they were trying to do with Ciaran is asking him about what was he feeling, these things, were these just thoughts he had, or were they actually plans that he'd made? And I think that's a really important distinction to flag as well. And that will be why, they got him to see someone quickly that day, because he was actually kind of envisaging a plan and a place, and I think that's something to flag up for people if anyone's having that sort of feeling. I know we work with a wonderful counsellor called Kathy as part of Shine, and she says to us when we're doing work together, actually feeling that way is not that unusual. It's not to say it, you don't need help with it, but I think you can have a thought like that and that can terrify you, and you think, oh my gosh, this is like, I'm obviously in a really bad space. And actually the thought and the feeling, you're sort of playing around with mortality and what's happening and what are my options and all of that. It can lead you to those thoughts without it being an actual plan you've made. And I think distinguishing between having a thought, playing around with the concept of living and dying, which is something you kind of are faced with when you have cancer diagnosis, versus like, actually, I've thought about a practical way of doing this. The former, definitely get help, talk to someone. The latter, I think, get the help, do something immediately if you're feeling that way.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to hear from Ben, who realised after his cancer treatment that he was mentally not in a good space. And he'd actually had 2 different kinds of cancer. So he had myeloma in 2013 and then lymphoma in 2017. So he'd been through a lot, and we're going to jump in with him now.
After 18 weeks, the results were coming back that they were able to suppress the lymphoma considerably, and that I was in a state of what they were calling remission. So they felt that there had been a success, and that they had suppressed it sufficiently to allow me to sort of live my life. What the frustration is that follicular lymphoma is a chronic illness, so they can't eradicate it completely. So I was sort of cured, but sort of not, in a way. But I was able to then carry on with living with this sort of dark cloud hanging over me, almost, of what's the future hold, whilst they've been able to treat it and work with me. At this point in time, I was still always conscious. Not a day went past almost where I was thinking about what if this happens? What if that happens? How does this affect my relationship, my work, everything really? But what was helpful at the time was the physical checkups. So again, I went into a program of monthly checks where I'd go to the hospital and I would have my bloods checked, and they'd do a physical check on me, and I'd have a consultation as part of that with the specialist at Guy's Hospital at London Bridge, which is quite close to where we live, which is quite comforting. But I never did anything at that point around my mental health. Never really crossed my mind. I'd had conversations with my clinical nurse and her team and the consultants that there was things available to me, but I felt that I was okay because I was getting these physical checks, and I'd go in for my physical check. The blood seemed fine, Ben. There's no lumps and bumps. You're okay. And off I'd go and carry on with life. And that then was really sort of how my life was for a number of years. And I seemed to be able to keep the fear and the anxiety at a reasonably low level, but it was always there and always something that I never really sort of addressed. As part of that, and what caused that to become an issue was the pandemic. And I began the pandemic, like many people, in lockdown, obviously, with working from home and losing that busyness in life that had kept me from thinking too much about my illness. And with lockdown and working from home, I had a bit more time on my hands. And with more time on my hands, I had more time to think and worry about the what ifs. And as part of that, again, because I didn't have at the time tools or ways to deal with these anxieties and these fears, I started to drink alcohol more than I should have. And the alcohol became my coping mechanism for that worry. And with the stresses of work, the stresses of life, and then the stresses of this health issue that I seemed to constantly be worrying about, I tended to drink alcohol to escape that reality. I was really sort of at the time coping, thinking I was coping with it by drinking, when really I was checking out, and the issues would all still be there when I would come back from drinking. So during the pandemic, during COVID, I realized that this was becoming a problem. People around me realized it was becoming a problem. I decided to get therapy, try and get some help. And my doctors, consultant and my nurse at the hospital provided me with some contact details. And I also reached out to Shine. And that's when I undertook the Shine Breakup program, registered for that, and met a number of fantastic people who also were experiencing different stages of different cancers. And we worked a program over a number of weeks with facilitators from Shine, and it was fantastic. It was really good. And it was the first time I had actually done any sort of group therapy work. Really enjoyed it, really bonded with the people that were on the call, and we're still on a WhatsApp group now. We still talk to each other. Some of them were aware of today, actually, and wished me well, which was really nice. And it was during that I thought, I felt this is enough. This is dealing with my worries and my issues, but it actually wasn't. I did need more help. And at the time, I didn't think I did, but my drinking didn't really slow down or stop. And so I continued to pursue medical therapy support through psychiatrists, through psychologists, through psychotherapists. And it really was a bit of a trial and error. I went through the NHS in the first instance, and the availability of seeing someone was challenging. And luckily I have private cover through work, so I was able to tap into that. And I was able to eventually find someone who I felt I could open up more to. And I got to a point really where I had been, my drinking was really out of control, you could say. It was unmanageable. My life was becoming unmanageable as a result of that. And I had to basically be honest with myself, be honest with my therapist. I was told him everything. I reached out to Alcoholics Anonymous at the time as well, to seek help from them, the program and fellowship that is. And through that step that I made, that I realized I had to do that to address this, I was able to stop my drinking, start looking at the reasons why I had been, become, or why I was drinking so much, and understand those issues and start to unpack that and realize what my thoughts and feelings were that were resulting in this behavior. I also through my therapist, was able to, and through my employer, who was very, very supportive, I was able to take some time off work, and I was able to undergo a day program at a hospital where they do psychiatric sort of work with people dealing with all sorts of things in life, not just health issues. But it was a very, and this was only 4 months ago, really. It was a very special time for me because I was able to learn so much more about myself. And I learned more in that period of time than I had for a very long time over my life. And it was all centered around mental health. I was able to learn more about mindfulness, awareness, cognitive behavioral therapy. I was able to deal with my anger management, and I was able to start to realize and identify when I was becoming anxious or when I was stressed with something. Just take a step back and understand or try to understand what the reasons were, and then look at those reasons rather than, I'm really stressed, this is all too much, I'll have a drink to forget about things. So through the therapy program, I was able to start dealing with those issues, and through the support of AA as well, I was able to tackle the drinking problem, which it was. And I accepted that. I'm happy to say that through through the AA program, I haven't had a drink since, and it's 110 days today. But that's a journey, and that's something I'll continue to work on, because I know that doesn't help me with my mental health. So I don't touch that, and certainly don't plan to. But the therapy work is great, because it was great, and it's something I keep going back to now, because they've taught me some tools to be able to identify when those issues are starting to arise. And middle-aged man, I didn't really communicate much with my anxieties, my stresses. I wasn't a good communicator with my partner. I wasn't a good communicator with friends or family. I always seemed to just bottle things up, and that really was a pressure cooker, and would result in issues of resentment, issues of anger, issues of stress, fear, anxiety, and that would all just sort of bubble away, really, and it would then explode with me using the wrong tools to address the real concern.
That last line, the wrong tools to address the real concern, it just really encapsulates, his story is so well told. And yeah, like Ciaran and Rime, I was so in it, and also able to relate to my own experiences by hearing him. And yeah, like the wrong tools. Is that something?
Yeah. I mean, Ben's insight is incredible, isn't it? Like, to be able to kind of go through all that and reflect. And I think that's hard won insight.
Yeah.
But absolutely. I mean, I think there is such a, what we're talking about here is anxiety of the highest level, isn't it? That, like, what's going to happen, the what ifs he talks about. And I'm sure everyone listening who's gone through cancer or any difficult diagnosis would know exactly what that means and what that feels like and looks like. The desire to just get rid of that feeling is so strong, isn't it? And it's just, if there was something that could just take this away. And unfortunately, the things that do that quickly aren't always the best things for us. Or, if we do that again and again and we can't stop doing that, then they're the difficult things. And I think, we don't have to be talking about full-blown addiction or alcoholism here. These can be like just behaviors that aren't that great either, like just sticking your head in the sand or zoning out, or, just not communicating with anyone so you don't have to talk about it. Saying I'm fine whenever anyone asks, all those are ways of just shutting down that reality of the emotion of what you're going through.
Yeah.
He
puts it so beautifully, is like bottling it up and becoming a pressure cooker. Like, you can really see that, keeping everything in just as much maybe as the expression of those fears in the drinking. And it can come out in so many different ways. I think people imagine that when, you have cancer, that you're going to, eat all the right things and look after yourself. But actually, it can manifest like that. It can be eating the bad things and,
Absolutely.
It
can be about your self-care, can't it? Like the ways that you are, like neglecting that self-care.
That is,
I was awful for not while I was going through treatment, but subsequently just not taking the right medication, just not doing it as a kind of 2 fingers up. I don't want to be subject to all these rules and things I've got to do and follow. And this is my rebellious, actually, this isn't happening. I'm not playing. And you're like, who are you harming here? Like, there is no one. The 2 fingers is going up to no one except yourself and your health. Like, it's not affecting anyone else. But you can get in that real sort of unhealthy coping strategies, which can be really hard to let go of if they work in the short term.
Yes. And that's the thing, and they can work in the short term. And I can completely see your rebelliousness coming out in that way. And it does make sense to me. And also that you're the only one that pays for it, which, again, like, not getting into kind of a nutritional thing, but if you're either not eating or not taking care of your basic needs through food, that becomes, sort of another way to kind of like almost punish your body, but it's only you that's being punished by that, not anybody else. So again, it's like this internalization of these feelings, but lashing out inwardly.
Yeah. And I think I've always thought with any mental health diagnosis, if it becomes that kind of that it needs a diagnosis and you need help, really they're just extreme behaviors that we can probably all relate to.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about addiction and alcoholism, it's, it's a compulsion and an obsession and you cannot stop even though you want to. I'm pretty sure most people can relate to, oh God, I drank too much and now I feel rough and I'm never doing that again. And then the next, it's a familiar pattern, or my head's so full and I just want something to take the edge off. I'm just going to do it tonight, even though it might not be they're all sort of inverted commas normal behaviors that when they become that they're affecting your life in a really destructive way, that's when it becomes a bit more of a sort of thing that might be diagnosed and treated and you might get professional help with. But even if you're not at that stage, I think it's just a really healthy thing to look at, is there anything I'm doing that's just not serving me well at the minute? And is there someone I could talk to about that? And what might I do to get some support around changing it a little bit?
Yeah, and not being embarrassed if it's years and years after whatever, was the big challenge. I know for me, during cancer treatment and for years afterwards, I couldn't actually drink more than 2 drinks. I wanted to. Oh boy, did I want to. But my throat would literally close up on the second drink and I couldn't get it down my neck. And I wanted to let loose. I wanted to get drunk. And it just wasn't happening. And then eventually over time, I was able to drink a little bit more, but I was super lightweight. And then I ended up having some functional neurological issues. And this was about 5 years afterwards. And those, they were really crazy making. So it was nerve pain all over my body. I couldn't walk down a hallway without falling. The walls and the floor were moving. I couldn't drive. Had to have scans to make sure that there was nothing in my brain. So my stress levels just went way up. And so did my anger at my body. Like at that point, I was like, it's one thing for cancer. It's one thing for menopause. It's one thing for, losing a pregnancy. But now this? Are you kidding me? And I just sat with a bottle and just started drinking. And actually, it made walking in the waviness make more sense. So weirdly enough, I'm not, it's definitely not something that I should have done. But then I started drinking just because I was mad, that rebelliousness. I'd done good by my body and look what it's doing to me. And there was this, complex kind of lashing out, but really it was lashing in. And having to like eventually look at that and go, it's not really helping, is it?
Yeah, and it's, where do you go with that stuff? It's not easy to find, I think. And we don't talk about it enough either. Like in terms of, what Ben's talking about is alcoholism, and he's got some help with it, and that's amazing. And it sounds like he's doing incredibly well.
Yeah.
I think addiction can come out in all sorts of ways. Like I ended up being on like strong painkillers for a really long time at the end of my treatment. And it became a real problem for me. And it has been something that I've continued to monitor. And that's like 20 years on now. And I still have to be aware of my sort of behavior around those kind of drugs, because what it did for me, and I think this is the problem, is when you combine trauma with something that quickly relieves stress and anxiety, it's like a perfect storm. Like it's almost not surprising that you end up wanting that substance for more than just its pain-killing benefits. You take this painkiller, it gets rid of whatever pain you've got. It also makes you feel chilled out and floaty. Like, why wouldn't you want more of that when you're super stressed and going through a really difficult time? But nobody, when they're giving patients, to be fair, this was some time ago, it may have changed. I honestly don't think it has, but I have to give them the benefit of the doubt. There's very little talk when giving you stuff like that to help with symptoms, whether it's anxiety medication, whatever it is. There's very little chat around the potential for addiction in that world. So again, it's something I think it's the stigma, isn't it? With all this stuff, asking for help around that stuff is really, really difficult, but it's so important, and it's there, and it's again, it happens to a lot of people.
And did you get help?
There are a lot of people in the community.
And did you get help with it?
I did. Yeah. I've seen counsellors on and off and got therapy on and off ever since my illness. Initially, I was really reluctant, and I was like I said, I was that uptight perfectionist, won't talk about how you feel person. And it took me a bit of time to find someone who I did feel comfortable talking to. That really helped. And now I use that as my yardstick of like, actually remind yourself, this can be really useful. And I treat it just like you'd go for a MOT on your health. Every few years, I just go and have a bit of therapy, because I think it's just, I want to check in with how I'm doing and make sure that I'm as happy as I can be given everything that's going on. And for me, it's been the best thing.
Yeah, and that thing of not giving up, I think that was something that Ben said. It was a bit of trial and error finding. Yeah. So, it is tough when you're going through something that the first person you go to might not be the right one for you. I sometimes think finding a therapist is like dating. I know that might be really inappropriate. But there is this sort of a chemistry, and when you find the right one, it can, really unlock so much. But I've definitely had some that were just a waste of time. With Rime and Ciaran and Ben, they've all got so many insights. And so some of the things that they were pointing to was, yes, reaching out, not waiting too long. Like, it's okay to go earlier. Some of the things that they wish they had done differently is like, I wish I had seen somebody sooner. And trying new things. So Ben saying I'd never done a group support situation, didn't know that I was into all of that. But actually, like, hearing about what he's gone on to do afterwards has been really, really incredible. Can you tell us a little bit about the Shine programs?
Yeah, so if you're looking at a sort of a whole ream of resources that are available to people, the Shine programs are one of those, and they do, like a few of the guys talking today have mentioned that they've done the programs and found them really helpful. And I think what they are is a 6-week online program. We meet for 2 hours online once a week. And we do different programs. So we do one called the Breakout, which is for anyone at any stage of treatment. We do one called the Circles program, which is for anyone with an incurable diagnosis or living with a chronic cancer. And then less frequently, but we do run programs for +1s, so partners of young adults as well. Essentially what that does is it just gives you that space, that 2 hours a week where you can talk to people who just will get it, and you're not going to have to filter, and you can share some of the thoughts that you might be worried are crazy, or that you're thinking, God, am I the only one thinking this? Because I think for me, when we're talking about this, the isolation of living with illness and then mental health symptoms or a diagnosis, whatever it is, it's the isolation is something that just emphasizes your experience of those symptoms in a way that it's almost like it's a quick fix that might actually work and be healthy, like talking to someone, like rather than sort of just taking the edge off. I've found that personally, but also through running these programs, the most positive feedback we get is about the chance to talk to other people who are going through the same thing, who get it. So they are, we run them pretty frequently. So always keep an eye out, because applications are actually open for the March program now.
Lovely. And they can find that on shinecancersupport.org. Yeah. And also on social media. I mean, we're everywhere, but definitely go to the webpage. You can find out loads more information.
And in those programs, like we touch on a lot of the things we've talked about today, a lot of the kind of feelings and emotions that come with going through cancer. So if you're struggling, that's absolutely something to think about.
Yes. So thank you to Clare for joining me today. And thank you so much. A huge thank you to Rime, Ciaran and Ben for sharing your experiences. And, you can see even with me and Clare, like how much we've related to them. And I know lots of you listening will have related to parts of their stories. So thank you so much. And also thank you to Radio Facilities for sponsoring our podcast. Until next time, bye.